Welcome to Dingsco FM's podcast, where we discuss individual and business growth with guests who are an expert in their field. In this episode, we focus on business growth and we discuss the ever-growing business strategy called employer branding. We'll get to understand what the experts mean when they talk about employer branding and why it's important for business leaders to pay particular attention to this area. We'll also discuss the benefits of getting employer branding right, and we'll share success stories of businesses that boosted their brand and reaped the rewards. Our guest today is an experienced businesswoman and a certified specialist in employer branding. Celeste Sirin is the founder and managing director of Employer Branding Africa, and her mission is to educate and partner with business leaders to develop employer branding best practice. She is a leading authority on positioning and elevating employer brands for companies, and she has a deep insight into local, African, and international trends in this area. She's facilitated local and international employer branding masterclasses to educate the market on essentials of employer branding. She's also coached, trained, and consulted with business brand leaders across diverse industries. When she's not in office, you'll find Celeste writing blogs on global employer branding trends and gardening, and she particularly loves growing her own herbs and vegetables. Welcome to the show, Celeste.
Thanks very much, Di, and I'm very honored and privileged to be speaking to you today.
Thank you so much for joining us. We love having you here, Celeste. So you've been in the employer branding industry for many years, and you clearly have a very deep passion for it. Can you please share with us, where did your journey start and what brought about this passion?
Without giving my age away, it started back in the 90s, where I came from a traditional recruiting background with a focus very much on running a temp desk. It shifted then to bulk recruitment, which was at the start of the contact center and BPO time. It was also at a time where call centers were actually unknown and skills were actually unknown. They had to be built and they had to be taught from scratch. But essentially where my passion really started was when I took over the ownership of a company called Strategy Recruitment Marketing, where we in fact built it into an award-winning print media advertising company. And the focus was really around writing and creating eye-catching and compelling adverts in order to best attract talent. What really got to me was the fact that companies always spend so much time on and attention at marketing products and services, but they were always sorely lagging behind in how they actually marketed themselves as a place of work. And talent were always in dire need and hungry for that additional information. And companies were also not understanding why they were not able to attract the right talent. This was when I started digging a bit deeper, and I thought there must be more to just the plain old job adverts that we see. And the discovery then was through finding employer branding and recruitment marketing through a lot of desktops research and a lot of exploring in that. I thought to myself, hold on a sec, this is untapped value that can be provided to recruiters who are looking at assisting their clients to better market and sell the vacancies within their organization. So that's where it all started, Di.
And what an incredible journey that was, Celeste. You've learned so much along the way in terms of how you're going to groom employer branding and bring it into the market. And it's really fantastic to hear the origin story. For those of us who aren't familiar with the term employer branding, Celeste, can you please tell us more about it?
It's so funny that you asked that question, because a lot of people say, what do you actually do? And they cannot actually grasp the concept of employer branding, because people are doing it, but they don't actually define it as employer branding. There's pockets of excellence that is done within organizations, whether it be talent acquisition campaigns, whether it be persona development, whether it be any part of recruitment that is a form of employer branding. But it's all-encompassing, because employer branding is very broad. So in essence, what employer branding is, it's really an individual's perception from the outside as a candidate and the lived experience as an employee from the inside of what it's like to work for a company. And there's lots of definitions, and a lot of people have got their own analogies and their own ideas of what employer branding is. But the best analogy is really to take it to the consumer space, where if you're looking for a product online, or if you're looking to purchase something, that whole experience of being able to find the information easily and also get reviews and understand what you are really going in for or looking for is really how I can compare what employer branding is like. So think about when last you were a candidate and you were looking for a job. How easy was it for you to find that information? How easy was it to understand what the culture, the values, and almost have a lens on the inside view of what the company was like to actually work there? Then also the whole experience of being able to apply for a position. Was it a frictionless approach? Was it a memorable experience from the moment that you saw the job online to when you were actually speaking to a recruiter on the other side? How was your interview process? How was your onboarding process? And then eventually shifting into being an employee and the actual employee experience and life cycle that you went through as a team member within the organization. So I hope that really explained the whole meaning behind employer branding, because a lot of people are not clear on it.
That is such a great explanation of it, Celeste, and it makes it so much clearer, especially when you use the analogy and you compare it to how businesses market products and services compared to how they market themselves to attract and retain the right talent. So there are clearly benefits to doing employer branding and taking care of your employer brand as a business leader. Can you tell us a bit more in depth? Why is employer branding important for businesses? What are the benefits of getting it right? So what are the internal benefits that businesses tend to reap?
Also, a very good question. And I think it's always very difficult as a champion behind employer branding to motivate the whole business model and get buy-in, especially from the top, your CEOs and your leadership team and your decision makers, because it's sometimes viewed as a hot and fluffy. And how do you actually see the benefits and the return on investment and the value behind it? And if you think about it, candidates that are limited to finding information on you as a company, you're dispositioned as a company because you're not going to be able to attract them easily. You have to be able to package your brand and take it to market. Otherwise, you're not going to be advantaged by people knowing who you are. You are going to remain a mystery. Once again, think about that whole consumer mentality where if you're not out there, especially as we move into a remote environment and onto social media, if you are not visible and you are not a recognizable brand, you're not going to be able to compete for talent the way your talent competitors can. It's also a perfect opportunity for companies to actually position the value exchange between what a potential employee can get from the organization in return to what they would be required to give. We call this the employer value proposition. And the employer value proposition is really around the benefits and the value exchange between what you need to give in order to receive in return. So without an employer branding strategy, you cannot shape and educate the candidates on what you stand for as an employer. And it will be that much harder to actually acquire talent and compete for talent, especially with the global talent market that's opening up fast and furiously. If you are a recognizable employer brand, it also assists with reducing the cost to hire up to, in fact, 43%. There's a lot of research when it comes to this. And there are tried and tested case studies that have proven that you can actually improve the time to hire, the quality versus the quantity, and repel the wrong and attract the right candidates. But also it assists recruiters with the heavy lifting if you are actually shaping and informing the talent market about what your employer brand is all about out there in the public space, and not have to start educating from scratch when you are trying to compete and secure them as a potential employee within your organization. So from an external perspective, this is where the favorable metrics really shine up. Internally, it's becoming increasingly important for companies to actually keep their finger on the pulse of the needs and the well-being of employees, because this is shifting continuously. We're living in uncertain times, Di, as you know, and with the remote working, with the requirement for flexibility, with the hunger to grow and to be promoted and have that work-life balance, if you are not attending to the ever-changing needs of your employees, they're going to start looking elsewhere for an alternate place of employment. So keeping your finger on the pulse and doing ongoing listening forums with your employee workforce is critical, because as we know, it is so expensive to replace that talent and have to retrain them. So better the devil you know than you don't know. Your EVP almost acts nowadays as your anchor. It is the currency to attracting talent, but also retaining talent. And having a strong employer brand internally also assists you with having happy employees who naturally become influencers and brand advocates. So when it comes to the trusted voice and leveraging the trusted voice of your employees as influencers in order to attract future talent, you can always rely on them because they will stand by you if you are looking after them. There's also a very positive knock-on effect when it comes to your employer brand almost being a sub-brand of your holistic corporate brand, because it's interchangeable and they are basically connected and interwoven if you think about the corporate brand, the consumer brand, and the employer brand. So that, in effect, is where the benefit lies in companies embracing employer branding.
That sums it up so nicely, Celeste. And there are clearly great benefits that businesses can yield from getting their employer brand right. You've often spoken about a lot of the time there's an impact on bottom line, which we'll chat about in a little bit as well. Now, you've worked with a lot of businesses, Celeste, and you've obviously seen the gaps. And one of the things that you mentioned earlier was an employer branding strategy, which it seems like there is a gap where that is concerned. Businesses may have their general strategy in place, but not necessarily their employer branding strategy in place as a subset. So in your experience, what are some of the other common mistakes that businesses make when they manage, or perhaps they mismanage, their employer brand?
There's been trials and tribulations with working with some clients in that. And again, it's about guiding your client correctly to almost like mind the gaps. And there are a number of different areas, common mistakes that can occur and do occur. And it's not foreign across the globe when it comes to these kind of pitfalls that one needs to actually manage and guide your client through. The one thing, and it's very common, is that companies often give the likes of your talent acquisition leader or your marketing comms person that is already overstretched. They give them the role and responsibility to actually carry out the implementation of employer branding strategy. Now, employer branding must not be viewed as a project, a start and an end. It's basically a business principle that needs to be adopted by an organization. It lives within the company. It lives within the organization. It cannot be looked at as a short-term tactical deliverable. And the companies that I've worked with have clearly seen how important it is in terms of providing the right resources and the budget and the time in order to invest in this very, very important principle. We spoke about the employer value proposition and how important it is to get it right in order to almost give your employees a sense of stability, but also candidates a great idea of, what's on offer. It's important that you actually invest the time in building a compelling and authentic employer value proposition. You can't shortchange it. It's imperative that you actually spend time in doing this. It cannot be short-lived. The other thing is employer branding needs to get the focused attention it deserves. Otherwise, you're not going to actually meet your objectives and your deliverables. You can't shortchange. If you're going to sign up to embed an employer branding strategy and you have motivated the reasoning behind it, you have to follow it through. You can't cut corners. You can't actually limit your resources due to time constraints or budget. What sometimes can happen is the employer branding roadmap, it is quite lengthy and it can take up to 2 years, in fact, if done properly, depending on the size of the organization. But if, for example, you do not do proper groundwork in gaining employee insights and research upfront, you can't confidently build an employer value proposition and launch it. The second thing is companies, they can spend time and resources in building that employer value proposition and kickstart the employer brand journey very confidently and strongly. But then what happens is it sits on the shelf and it doesn't actually grow wings and fly. Again, let's take it back to the consumer mindset. Once you've built a product or a service and you know what the unique selling points are around it, you don't put it on the shelf and leave it there to just date. You have to actually have a route to market. You have to have a activation strategy in place in order to make it live and make it thrive. So from an external perspective, your whole recruitment marketing philosophy behind taking your brand to market is important, because this is how people can start seeing what your employer brand stands for. Likewise, you need to integrate it. You need to actually ensure that you are internalizing your employer branding strategy. Otherwise, your culture, your values are not going to actually live. You need to appreciate and you need to accredit those brand ambassadors internally on truly living the brands. It's not just words, it's how people are actually rolling with your whole employer brand and the pride and the trust and all of that they have in making the brand actually live. The last thing is the unintentional disconnect that sometimes companies have, saying outside in the candidate marketplace what you stand for, but back at the ranch internally, employees are saying that does not sound like us at all. So activating a recruitment marketing campaign in order to take your employer brand to market, it's all very good and well, but that brand needs to be authentically translated internally as well. There can't be a disconnect in how you take it to market to how your employees actually view it and experience it internally. So those are the pitfalls, Di.
Celeste, that's really some food for thought. And a lot of business leaders can certainly give that some consideration, especially as far as trying to integrate it into their overall strategy and bringing employer branding on board. So you spoke a lot about follow through and continuity and consistency with the employer branding strategy and to keep going with it. And when you look at continuity and you look at you having partnered with businesses before and having helped them to boost their employer brand and of course in turn their bottom line, what's the kind of change or shift that happened in those businesses, if you don't mind sharing one or two anonymous success stories with us?
Absolutely no problem. This year, Employer Branding Africa, in effect, worked with 2 leading brands. Both organizations at the forefront had similar objectives. And I'm pleased to confirm that both of them have actually reaped the return on investment to date. The one I'm finished with, and they basically have adopted the employer branding framework and they're running with it themselves. The other one I'm actively still promoting and marketing their brand in their community. So first of all, the common objectives. The first thing was not only their consumers, but their candidates knew them for their product as a supplier of a service or a product, but they were unknown as a place of work. So we needed to actually build this knowledge and we needed to inform and shape this in the marketplace. But at the same time, we needed to ensure that we were connecting and re-energizing the values internally of the employees, almost reunite and re-energize them to living and revisiting the culture that they had built over the years. So those were the 2 main objectives. But what they also needed to do was they needed to define their employer value proposition from not only the present values that reside within their organization, but often companies have aspirational values. So when it comes to reaching those aspirational values, it's always good to have that on the horizon as well. But the whole employee experience was also something that we needed to focus on. Not only, first of all, being a candidate and the whole value chain that their talent acquisition teams were delivering to their candidates, but then the whole onboarding experience and then moving into that employee life cycle. The one company was also very focused on their talent attraction strategy and looking for critical skills. Because what was happening is they wanted to reduce the volume of unsuitable candidates and be far more intentional in attracting the right candidates. The online presence and building that recognizable, reputable footprint that they had for their consumer brand was equally important for them in positioning their employer brand. So you might ask, what has been the return on investment to date? The first thing is we built a toolbox of recruiter assets. Now, what happens is a lot of the time, especially in the talent acquisition and recruitment space, shifting that transactional methodology of attracting talent is not very easy because we get into habits of doing things the same old, same old. And we built a toolbox of recruiter assets, having a look at the job ads, having a look at their persona templates, and really assisting them with building assets that could help them repel the wrong and attract the right candidates. Investing in a competitive, authentic, and strong EVP also enabled them to enable their own recruitment strategies, which assisted them with reducing having to go externally to recruitment agencies and obviously assisted them with the spend in that regard. And then creating a human and almost like an emotional connection around the product and consumer brand. So people had a new appreciation behind what was put on the shelf. What actually went into making that commodity or that product? But then also having a sense of the individual behind the plate of food that was being served to you at this popular outlet. Just that human connection was so important. People could start appreciating the actual individual behind the brand. And then garnering the candidate market support through leveraging the loyalty of the long-standing employees. That also was a big factor as well. So basically, utilizing the employee's trusted voice to articulate what it is like to work within the organization. Because as we know, people that are actually working within the trenches on a daily basis are the ones that are able to articulate what it's really like to work at an organization. Not your leadership or your CEO, it's the ones on the front line. And then finally, the employer branding, positioning, and recruitment marketing, being able to actually do the heavy lifting in educating and marketing around the employer brand, as I spoke about earlier on. At the early stage of the recruitment process has shortened the time that recruiters have needed in order to do the hard sell and the convincing, and has shortened the interviewing process, in fact. So these are some of the assets that we have built for these clients, Di.
Celeste, this is a conversation that warrants so much more time. And it's so fascinating to get into and learn from you about employer branding. And this is just the tip of the iceberg, I'm sure.
Of course.
and there's so much more to learn from you. And, there may be a business owner or an employer out there who wants to get in touch with you after this podcast, and they want to continue this conversation with you and get some advice and consult with you. So where are all the places and spaces that they can get in touch with you and reach out to you?
Thanks very much, Di. Yes, we've got a website, which is www.employerbrandingafrica.com, and my contact details are there. But I would love people to reach out to me via LinkedIn as well. I do quite a lot of emails and communication via LinkedIn. My mobile number is 082 82 82118, easy number to get hold of me on. And I'm always very open to have an exploratory discussion, especially with us being at the end of the year now, Di, where organizations are projecting what is their runway looking like for 2023, especially when it comes to talent acquisition. There's a lot of predictions on where is employer branding placed in the new year. And with our market being quite different to the United States or the European market in that, there's a lot of layoffs happening globally in that. And, we had the big boom where there was a lot of scaling up, but now there's a lot of laying off. And it's very questionable in terms of what is the role of the talent acquisition specialist and advisor now. I believe our market is unique within Africa. Yeah. There will always be a demand for high-tech talent. So in terms of, shaping and informing and positioning your brand in order to secure high-tech talent, that will always be there. But in terms of securing your employees and ensuring that you actually show them the worth, I see a lot of companies doing a lot of homework in that regard because, as I say, that uncertainty is making employees feel very unsettled and not knowing what to actually expect in the new year. I think being able to ground these individuals and give them a sense of purpose and belonging more so is going to be important. And then a big thing that's on many CHROs' agendas is actually mobilizing your employees and growing them internally, showing them that they can actually grow within the organization and there's no need for them to look outside of their organization in order to aspire to being promoted or growing elsewhere. So I think from that perspective, I think the focus is going to be very much on how to position your employer brand and internalize it that much more. And then from a recruiter's perspective, I think now is the time. If orders have been filled and there's not much recruiting happening, I think really perfecting the candidate experience and the value chain and really getting your head around leveraging employer branding and the untapped opportunities that surround employer branding and recruitment marketing, I really do believe that there's a massive gap there. And I think people are just not taking enough advantage of it. And now's the time to upskill yourself and make it your business to understand, the worth behind it.
I couldn't agree with you more that this is the right time, not just in terms of the phase that we're in as far as coming out of the pandemic and trying to move forward, but also this time of the year. This is the time where businesses are often focusing on their strategies, as you said, for the new year, 2023, and making appropriate plans. And this is the perfect time to be looking at what are the other sub-strategies that I should be incorporating into my overall business strategy. And certainly employer branding, especially as part of an HR strategy, this is the perfect time to start incorporating that and thinking about what is it that we want to change as far as the face of our business from next year onwards. Thank you so much for being our guest today. It really is always a pleasure to talk to you, and it is wonderful to have you on the show today. You've taught us so much about employer branding, and you've shown us exactly how businesses can get it right so that they attract and retain the right people. And given your track record in helping business leaders to enhance their employer brand, I have no doubt that you'll continue to grow in your mission to develop employer branding best practice across our continent. I definitely look forward to having you back again in future to catch up on your employer branding journey.
Thanks very much for the opportunity. It's been wonderful speaking to you, Di.
We hope that you enjoyed today's podcast episode. Be sure to come back regularly for more great content that focuses on personal, career, entrepreneur, and business growth. Find out more about our coaching services and get in touch with our team by following the link in our post or visit dingscoconsulting.co.za.